Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 238 of At Percussion podcast. My name is Ksenija. I get to introduce myself for the first time now because I got smarter after 30 episodes, and my co-hosts today are, as always, the wonderful Benjamin Charles.
Hi, everybody.
The incredible Carly Vigna.
Aw, hello.
And the fantastic Casey Cangelasi.
Oh, thanks. I thought that was leading up to a joke. and Casey. I was really sure, but thanks. Yeah,
so what's up in history today, Casey? What are we? We're recording on June 14th, releasing on July 16th.
So something that happened today in 1990. I don't know how familiar you guys are with subliminal messages in music, but they are pervasive and they're all real. So I have a sound. I have a sound for you guys, and I want you to tell me what you're hearing in this message. All right, that was it. This went to court. This went to trial for 6 long weeks. British heavy metal power rock band. One more time, I want to play it for you. What do you hear? It's 4 times repeated the same 2 words. Clear as day. What do you hear, Ben? Unless you read it. And I posted the article on the sheet with the explicit intention that you would not read it. And I'm sure you didn't.
I did read it, but
damn it.
I read it too.
You weren't supposed to read it.
When I listened to it, though, honestly, I don't hear any words. I hear instruments.
I completely agree with you. And I listened to the song, and I was going to listen to, I found the song on YouTube posted backwards. It's a Judas Priest song. And they went to, oh, thanks, Ben, I'm still screen sharing. They went to trial over this for 6 long weeks, from Great Britain, where they're from. And of course, it's this one of those sad stories of teen suicides, and the parents and the church organizations that encourage the parents to sue the band, saying that, hey, your teenagers committed suicide because of the influence of Judas Priest. And anyway, it's supposed to be saying, do it. And if you listen one more time, I bet you'll hear it. But you really need the suggestion of what it is to hear it. And every single one of these cases is that way. So do it. Yeah, I listened to the whole song trying to find that. And I couldn't find anything. Nothing made sense to me. So anyway, yeah, they were exonerated. And what I think was kind of interesting about the case itself was something that Rob Halford, the singer, who I know I've mentioned on the show before, because Rob Halford is one of those heavy metal musicians who I think is really cool, because when he came out as a homosexual, the metal community, and I'm really proud of this, they just didn't even flinch. It was just still total support, didn't affect record sales or anything. And everyone just kind of said oh yeah, great. It's supposed to be this tough guy genre of music, and nobody even flinched. And I was happy about that. So something Rob Halford says, after the case many years later in a Rolling Stone article, he says, our label took over the costs of the lawsuit for us. They understood that it wasn't just the musicians on the line, it was the label too. Had the judge found in favor about the so-called subliminal messages having the power to physically manifest themselves and make people do something, the ramifications of that would have been extraordinary. How do you prove to somebody that there are no subliminal messages on your record when you can't hear them in the first place? So none of us heard this. And even after telling you what it said, I think some of us still didn't hear it. In fact, sure. Ben shaking his head no, so I never heard any words. So he continues and says, when you got into the nitty-gritty of the possible outcome, it would have been quite stunning. When the verdict came in, we were relieved, but also a little disappointed. The judge left the door open to some extent. He didn't flatly say, quote, what the prosecution was suggesting actually didn't take place. He basically said, look, this is still a nebulous area. but it is my opinion that this band did not put these words into the song, and the outcome of those words created this tragedy. So we as the band were exonerated, but the whole thing as far as what subliminal messages have been can potentially do is left up in the air. So it would be really horrible to think that it could occur again, and we'll just have to wait and see. But so have the judge ruled in favor that yes, these were subliminal messages, and music can be so powerful as to control your mind and make you perform some action, it would have opened a door for so many other cases and like the future of music. It would be so much easier to say, oh, music has this control over us. And frankly, our free speech would be quite in jeopardy. Because as you all know, once you can cite it in one case, you can cite that case and the results of that case and the evidence of that case in subsequent cases later to prove your point. And we kind of think, well, this has nothing to do with us. None of us are in the rock and roll field. We're all in the contemporary classical music and percussion field. But only just a few years ago, there was a news story and this quick little trend. Steve Reich's music was supposedly the next thing getting your kids high. And as we all know, you listen to Steve Reich music, which is very hypnotic, very repetitive, just over and over and over, and it's very long. It can kind of have this like dizzying effect on you, especially if you're not used to it. You know, you do have to kind of build up a tolerance to that music. So there was this short little scare in the news that minimalism was, quote, getting our teenagers high. So it's that same kind of nonsense. And yeah, this is about the most comprehensive one of these trials I'm familiar with. They supposedly brought in a, quote, audio expert, whatever the heck that means, who turned out to be just an audio enthusiast, and he was a marine biologist, but he was the person saying like, oh yeah, if you play the tape backwards, you can hear it. If I slow it down, you can hear it even clearer. And yeah. It's all kind of sad, but also BS. What do you got, Ben?
Yeah, well, it's interesting for me. I'm, as we all know, a huge Beatles fan, and the Beatles were the first band to start just playing sounds in reverse on records. And actually, like on purpose, they were actually playing guitar sounds in reverse and so on. And so it gave way to this idea. The term for what Casey's talking about is backmasking, where you have some sort of message that's hidden. And the famous example from the Beatles is, of course, that Paul McCartney is dead in their song Revolution number 9. You can apparently hear something about Paul being dead. It's not true. Paul McCartney is very much still alive.
Prove it.
But anyway,
you can't prove
never
it.
seen the Paul McCartney double and Paul McCartney in the same room. But Casey referred to this case from 1990. I think probably the most notable example of this from pop culture that people know is Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. And as soon as I read about this, I had to actually go read up on that. And first of all, there's a TED Talk called Why People Believe Weird Things by Michael Shermer, where he talks about if you're prompted to hear something and there's something that sort of sounds remotely like it, your brain actually hears that thing. So go check out that TED Talk. But anyway, I found some information about this, and in a January 1982 television program on the Trinity Broadcasting Network, hosted by Paul Crouch, it was claimed that hidden messages were contained in many popular rock songs through a technique called backmasking. One example of such hidden messages was that prominently cited was in Stairway to Heaven. The alleged message, which occurs during the middle section of the song when played backward, was purported to contain the satanic references, "Here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan. He'll give you 666. There was a little tool shed where he made us suffer, sad Satan." Quite a large assertion, and would have required a very large effort on the band to actually write lyrics forward that could sound remotely like that backwards. But anyway, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, obviously. And the Parents Music Resource Center, which was partially founded by Tipper Gore, they're the ones that slapped the parental advisory stickers on records. They like heavily investigated this. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Carly, I think you had something.
You know, what's so interesting to me about this is like, why isn't there really a solid way to prove? Like, and I wonder, because this was 30 something years ago, right? This particular case, and I'm sure some things have come up since then, but it just seems really strange to me. Like, there's no way to, I don't know, isolate the different components that were mixed together.
What's that burden of proof? Is
Yeah.
that the logistical fallacy term or whatever for it? Like, you can't disprove it, therefore it's true. It's like, well,
So the big kicker in the case, and I'm amazed this went on for 6 weeks. I mean, it doesn't seem like that difficult of a case to me, but the big kicker is what the band decided to do, and their lawyer, is they got together and they took other songs and found other phrases in them. It's sort of like the way numerologists say, like, oh, look what all these symbolic numbers, and the Bible predicted 9/11. People say that, yeah, given enough data of anything, whether it's sound, whether it's numbers, whether it's word after word on a page. I mean, the Bible is a big book. There's a lot of words. If you want to look for connections, conspiracy theories work the same way too. Given enough data, yeah, you're going to be able to like draw conclusions and tie things together. But the way the real convincing thing they did to the judge is they took other songs and played them backwards and said, okay, what do you hear? And they said nothing. And said, like, okay, but now if I say this, what do you hear? And gave the suggestion. And it was something like, peppermint leprechauns do backflips in the woods or something. It was just some nonsense. But that's the same type of thing. And the same way people said, oh yeah, 9/11 was predicted by the Bible must be real. People went and found the same predictions in Moby Dick. They went and found the same prediction in Harry Potter. It's just like, yeah, dude, that's why numerology is silly. It's not a real science. So anyway, it's always depressing. These news things are always depressing. Okay, Ksenija, now you take over.
No, this is really cool. I thought it was all really funny. Well, it's funny from this perspective. There are many elements of that were not funny. But let's now finally introduce our guest. So I am so happy that we get to talk with Anna Dunford today. And I'll let you know a little bit about Anna before I let her speak finally. Obviously, you guys already know that the topic of this episode is going to be the interaction of music and religion, or we can also broaden this to any type of community. So how can a religious community influence a person's professional career and vice versa? But a little bit about Anna. Anna is a performer and an educator based out of Boise, Idaho. I hope I pronounced that well with my Serbian tongue. She is a master's student at Boise State University in percussion performance and holds her undergraduate degree from Brigham Young University, Provo. Anna regularly performs with the Opera Idaho, the Boise Philharmonic, and the 208 Ensemble. She enjoys performing with local singer-songwriters and has toured the U.S. with the National Parks and High Riot, which are really cool. I'm really excited to talk about that. She is also the percussion instructor for the College of Idaho and maintains a private studio with students of all ages. Anna, hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So lovely to have you. We want to talk about a lot of things with you, but I guess we're going to start off with maybe a little bit of your background and exactly why we brought you in for this episode. I just want to say that the reason that this came up, actually, this episode, is because Anna and I have been talking a lot about a book that we both read called Educated. And Anna has communicated with me that she has had a sort of a relatable experience. So if you have not read this book by Tara Westover, if I'm correct, go ahead and read it. It's fantastic. But I thought that it's a really interesting topic that we rarely explore, which is religion and music, how it affects you. So Anna, please tell us a little bit about your growing up and how it's shaped you. How did you get into music? Tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, definitely. I grew up close to Dallas, Texas, in the Louisville Flower Mound area. And my family was very religious. They are Mormon. Ksenija, you mentioned that, we were talking about the book Educated by Tara Westover. And in that book, Tara grew up also Mormon, and her family took it very seriously. There are varying levels of devotion. But when I read that book, I did see a lot of parallels to my own life where religion was first and foremost above everything, and it influenced every decision I made. And I spent a lot of time, focusing on religion. And so, there are a lot of very unique cultural things about Mormonism. I'm sure there are for every religion, but in Mormonism, music is very important. And most families have a piano in their home. Almost everyone takes piano lessons. Everyone learns how to play hymns. There's lots of singing in our services on Sundays, and in basically every meeting, there's always hymn singing, and also a lot of people will perform like solos and things like that. And so I was similar. I grew up taking piano lessons. And so that's how I kind of got my start in music. And then when I was 12, that's when the band and orchestra programs start. And so I decided I wanted to be a drummer because I thought that was really cool to be a girl drummer. You know, the culture I came from definitely, a lot of people might think that was a little strange for a girl to do that, you know, instead of choosing one of the typically female instruments. And, you know, that, again, that goes for a lot of things outside of Mormonism too. But, you know, when I was 12, I was watching a lot of my male counterparts in the Mormon church receive the priesthood, which is, in their definition, the power of God to act for him on earth. So they can like give blessings, and they can, you know, pass the sacrament in our services and do things like that. And the priesthood is never given to women in the church. And so when I was 12, that's when that contrast really became evident in my life, you know, that I was excluded from something that seemed like I didn't understand why women couldn't have the priesthood. You know, we want to do good too. You know, why can't we have a little extra power to do that? So I think that probably influenced a little bit of my desire to play something powerful. You know, like drums were always very powerful and loud and involved a lot of movement. And so I think in a way it was kind of speaking out in a voice that I didn't have in other places. Anyway, so I had a great music education. I had amazing teachers in middle school and high school. My first lesson teacher was Sandy Rinnick, and my percussion teacher was Matt Quinlan, and you know, got to be a part of a really good drum line. And when the decision came about where I wanted to attend school, it was just kind of expected that I would go to Brigham Young University because that's where everyone in my family went. And, you know, my whole purpose in life was to get married and have a family. That's always what I was taught. And so BYU is where you go to find your spouse. You know, it's not always explicitly said that way, but you know, it's definitely viewed that way because Mormons come from all over the world to one place. It's kind of where you can find each other. And so, you know, I was also never really raised to have a career plan or any kind of idea of how to really get a job or anything like that. I was just kind of assumed I'd be a stay-at-home mother. And so part of me always wanted to pursue percussion, and I didn't know exactly what that would look like, whether I'd be a teacher or whatnot. But ultimately that took, you know, second place to, again, finding someone to marry. And so, you know, I auditioned to go to, or I applied to go to University of North Texas, and I was preparing an audition. But when it came down to it, I was like, well, I really don't see myself going anywhere but Brigham Young University. And so that's where I ended up going. But yeah, my high school experience, my teachers, you know, they encouraged me to perform my best musically, and you know, helped me set goals and really push myself. And when I got to BYU, you know, maybe this experience was different for other people, but I felt like even my percussion professors emphasized my life goal to get married. You know, like they would say things like, oh, well, someday when you have a family, maybe you can teach percussion lessons. Or one time a teacher said to me, like, oh, you're lucky because you're going to be a stay-at-home wife, and so you'll get to just practice all the time. And it was just like small things like that along the way where, it was everything always took, there just wasn't an emphasis on goal setting or musical excellence or things that I felt like I kind of had in my high school years. And again, maybe other people had different experiences, but I eventually decided to leave the Mormon Church, and it was a really long, drawn-out decision, and painful in a lot of ways. But I still struggle looking back on those years at BYU, and thinking about the time I could have spent putting that kind of devotion towards music and towards improving myself and reaching my goals. And I was actually reading Patty Nemi's book. I'm not sure if that's how you say her last name, but it's called Sticking It Out. And she's talking about her time at the New World Symphony down in Florida. And, she was one of the first 3 percussionists. And it was her, another woman, and then a guy, I'm pretty sure. But the other woman was very religious and ended up, I believe, dropping out of the program and going on some kind of mission trip. And Patty made the comment that her allegiances were divided or something like that. Like, you can't, it's very difficult to have like so much devotion towards, such strong devotion towards 2 things. And I'm sure I keep qualifying this, but like, I don't want people to think that I'm saying, you can't be religious and musical or something like that, but it was just very, I don't know, that was a line that really kind of hit me like, oh yeah, like I was putting so much devotion towards one thing that, I could have been putting towards another. But anyways, I hope I'm not rambling at this point.
No.
We had
Thanks so much.
Patty on the show. Patty talked about her book on the show.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, many episodes ago. I couldn't find it. Yeah, sorry, Ben. What do you got?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna ask. I didn't know you were from. I'm teaching in Texas. I didn't know that you were
nice.
from this area. And you said you studied with Sandy Rennick, who is fantastic. I mean, absolutely just a wonderful musician and human being. But I wanted to ask you. You talked about you reached this point of sort of cognitive dissonance where you saw boys that were like being given these, priesthood privileges. Is that?
Yeah.
And you said it was kind of like, well, why can't I do that? I feel just as, qualified to do that. And we've talked, especially last week with the diversity committee, we talked about like representation in the field. And it sounds like, I mean, from a very young age, you had this wonderful representative of what a female percussionist could be. Did that register when you were a youth, and did that affect you at all, or was it just something like you kind of slipped by and didn't even think about at the time?
I think it registered to an extent. Looking back now, I realize how important it was to have that just wonderful female example of someone who didn't ever let anything hold them back because of their gender. And my like general instructor, Matt Quinlan, he was very intentional about asking Sandy to come be our lesson teacher. He told me that one time that he wanted the girls in the class to be able to see her and learn from her for that exact reason.
Anna, you mentioned when you were studying at Brigham Young, the experience you had where it was just expected. It was, maybe spoken and often unspoken, like, well, you'll find a spouse, you'll get married, you'll have a husband, and you'll stay at home. And for me, it's really striking, I guess, that relationship, because for me, one of the most pivotal points in my education was early on in my undergrad. A teacher said to me, so do you want to get your master's in performance, and where do you want to go? And I had never considered that as an option for me at the time. I was a music ed major and planning on being a band director. And had that particular teacher not said that, I'm not sure that I would have dreamed beyond that. So my question for you is, how do you feel like your particular background and experiences influence and inform your teaching with the students you're working with now?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've thought of that before. I do think that I try to be very sensitive to anything I say that might somehow come across in a way that would limit their thinking, because I do feel like I felt that so much where, like I wish that maybe my teachers had pushed me in the way that you're talking about, because I felt that when I was in high school. I felt like my teachers really pushed me. They're the ones who were like, hey, you should, do this extracurricular solo competition, or things that I didn't know about, but that were huge for me. And so, whenever I'm teaching now, I try and take into consideration what the student wants, but then also try and, think bigger for them and help them see that there's more than what they can imagine at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
I just had the thought, thinking of this subliminal message intro that we had, and I just did the timestamps for the Diversity Alliance episode that we released early, several weeks ago now, but that Ksenija just sent me and had edited. And the theme in my mind is superstition. Racism comes from superstition. These crazy accusations against all these rock and roll groups all come from superstition. And when you don't believe in something, you can really recognize it as a superstition. And I don't mean to say that anyone's religion is that, but it does seem to be a theme with these things, and it really made me tie it especially to that episode Carly just mentioned with the Diversity Alliance and racism, especially. It's like, dude, racism comes from superstition. But I was going to ask Hannah, if you had said to, say, one of your percussion teachers, when they said, "Oh, well, lucky you, you're just going to be a stay-at-home mommy, so when the kids are napping, you can practice, and lucky you." If you had just said, "Oh, well, actually, I don't plan on doing that. I plan on," because like you said, there are different levels of devotion. Because I come from Utah as well. I've got a lot of Mormon friends still, and I've seen what you're describing, like a lot of different levels of commitment and devotion. Would it have been okay to say that?
Yes. I think, maybe it wouldn't have been well received, or maybe would have been a little awkward. I wish I had said something like that. At that point, I definitely didn't. I had so many conflicting messages, but the overwhelming message was that I wasn't going to have a career or goals or anything like that. So I wish that I could have had some well-formed thought to say like, oh, well, actually this, but again, it varies teacher to teacher. But in this case, I don't know that I would have even felt comfortable speaking up, because in a way, like the dynamics in the Mormon Church are that, especially the way I was raised to never question priesthood authority, and basically every man in the Mormon Church holds the priesthood. And so that kind of added to that dynamic with all my professors, who are all male, that, what they were telling me in my lessons, like, was not only like musical advice or life advice, but was like, kind of had a little more weight to it because they held the priesthood. And so, I, in particular, probably wouldn't have felt like it was my place to say something like that. It was just kind of like, oh, oh, okay, I guess that's how it works, you know.
Mm-hmm. Could I have gone to BYU? Can non-Mormons go to BYU?
They can.
Okay.
You have to agree to live by the honor code, which is a set of
No coffee, no beard.
rules. Yeah, you can't have a beard, you can't drink coffee or alcohol.
It was the coffee that did it for me. Because I thought BYU is a really good program in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a good program for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You would have had to take some like extracurricular scripture classes to kind of catch you up to speed, but I do think they prioritize Mormon students just because the tuition is subsidized by tithing money that comes from the general church population.
Gotcha.
But yeah,
cool.
I did have some non-Mormon friends there.
Gotcha.
So thanks so much for sharing. I think this is so important. And I think it's important for us to emphasize once more that this has nothing to do with the Mormon faith. In particular, that this could be with any sort of religious affiliation and to any degree or any sort of community belonging. It really depends. You could easily think, you could live in a secular society and still feel the grand pressure by everyone to go and get married and not pursue your career. So it really isn't, it's just one vehicle for the same message. And that's sort of leads into my next question, because this could be the issue of whether one should devote oneself to a career or to a family at a certain age, perhaps, or in their life, is a question that even people who don't affiliate with the religion, have. So I guess my question is, for one, were the men told a similar thing so that they should not go out and be career men, but be family men first and then just provide for their families? Or was it okay for them to go out and be career men first? We'll answer that one first, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Generally, like, men are encouraged to have careers and be successful so they can provide for their family. And Mormon families tend to be bigger, and there's an emphasis on being a family man and having a good home life. But really, the women experience more of that, or are told more about being in the home, and it's just a very traditional family structure in the culture. The traditional nuclear family. As far as like musical careers go, I didn't see a lot of the men encouraged to have any kind of career that would be perceived as like unstable or would keep them away from the home too often, aka like a touring career or something like that. It didn't seem like there were a lot of men in the School of Music. There were a lot of women, and I saw a lot of my peers switch from music to other more stable or more lucrative careers at BYU. There's like a really big business school there and things like that. But that's not to say there weren't any men who had successful careers and things like that. But, there was definitely more of an emphasis for the men to have a plan and be very serious about it and know that it was going to work out, as opposed to a lot of the women kind of almost being in the School of Music to just kind of bide their time until marriage. And again, this isn't everyone. But, there did seem to be kind of a difference there.
That's true for the secular society also. I mean, there are people who go to college to sort of like just mingle around and find themselves or a spouse more than their career path. Who knows? So I don't think that's very exclusive. Sorry, Casey, I'm not steamrolling because I told that it's a two-parter question. But I was going to ask, so what happens, you did, okay, but actually, let me ask first. Is it okay to talk about your marriage?
Yes.
Yes. So I'll go back. So you did get married, and so you did take that step, and you sort of went parallel in line with your religion. And was there any moment where anything changed in you, how did that make you feel? Did you feel at peace because you were aligning your actions with your faith, or how did that work out?
So you're asking, like, when I got married, did I feel like I had done the right thing?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm thinking about how to say this. I did feel like, okay, I accomplished the goal. I got to the thing that I spent my whole life working up towards. And that feeling didn't last very long. I think that was because I had been lucky to have teachers who helped me view myself in more individualistic ways, goal-oriented ways growing up. Because, like you're saying, a lot of people that's totally fine, but it didn't sit well with me. Because there had been so much emphasis on marriage and how it would, in a way, be the most fulfilling thing that I could do with my life, that my expectations were extremely high for how I would feel about that.
Yeah, very reasonable.
Yeah, and you know, I was quite young when I got married, and you know, hadn't been in that relationship for very long, and so it was very confusing to be feeling those things, because I thought that I would feel set for the rest of my life, as if I don't know, would just kind of coast, I guess. But yeah, it didn't take very long for me to realize that I still wanted to go further on my own career path.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Casey, you had something.
I was going to go back real quick and say, you know, Ksenija mentioned this idea we're talking about. It could be a social circle that's hard to escape. It could be some other thing. I was going to say, it kind of reminds me of the time Ben tried to leave the podcast and we all cornered him at PASIC. You're in this for life. There's no.
More likely, they cornered me and tried to make me leave.
Yeah. And Ben said, "No, I'm not leaving. You can't make me." Yeah. No, shoot. I had a serious thing, and now I've forgotten it. Oh, speaking of the gender roles and the man and wife and the family and the roles. My father is a mathematician. He's been teaching at Utah State University, which is, Logan, Utah. This is where I went to school. And it's maybe an hour and a half from Provo, something like that.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about like that. I know Provo is between Logan and Salt Lake City. I haven't lived there in so long that it's kind of just out of my mind. But yeah, you know, he talks about teaching these math courses and these high level math courses, and sometimes he'll get and you don't have to be a Mormon to attend Utah State University. It's a state college, and again, it's where I went. But Utah is, it's like the Mormon capital of the world, and it's kind of the motherland for the LDS Church. And sometimes you get a pair of students, like a husband and wife, and they often marry early, and they'd come in as a couple. And I remember him telling one story. The wife was like really relaxed and like, oh, I just want to be educated. I just want to complete my math degree or my engineering degree or whatever she was doing. And the husband was really stressed out because the math class was really hard for him and he wasn't getting it. And the sense my dad got from this one story, he's told me a lot of stories like this, was like he didn't really want to be there, the husband. He didn't really want to be doing this. And he felt this pressure, like he has to do this, he has to provide. And my dad's suggestion was, because they're very open with my dad. My dad's a very easy professor to talk to, and a lot of times people would bring their feelings to him about their futures, like we all take job advice and that sort of thing. And he said, you also should switch your roles. She should take the job. You're good at math. You love it. You don't seem to like it or be good at it. And you don't, like that's, so I don't know, there's a lot of unfairness, in that. And I don't know if they took that advice or not. And And of course, I mean, they would have been free to. It's not like you would have been booted out of the church had you done that or something.
Right.
But yeah, just I've heard many stories like that over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's as you said, Casey, I think it's in many ways it's so impossible to cut those ties. We may think if we're naive that these things are only related to religion, but I mean, if you've ever been indoctrinated by Disney, then it's so hard to wake up in your 20s and be like, actually, happily ever after doesn't matter at all. I'm just gonna go and be a badass at whatever I want to do. That's not true. It's not the stories that you've been told. So it's I think it's a really relevant conversation for anyone. And I guess my next question for Anna would then be when you left, when you sort of disassociated yourself from the Mormon Church, and was there a moment when your life changed, how the transition was, and how are you doing now? How does it feel to have a different kind of life now?
Oh man, how long do we have? No, I'm just kidding. So there was a very specific moment where I realized that I no longer believed in the doctrines or the church, or felt that I wanted to be a part of it. And this was about a year and a half after being married. It was a few months after graduating from BYU, and it was right after I finished my time touring with the National Parks, which was an all Mormon band, not necessarily Mormon in the content, but very much, palatable to Mormon people. Basically I was trying to pray to God and ask him a question, and felt like I couldn't get an answer for it. And all of a sudden I just, I don't know, it was just a very quick realization that I didn't think I believed in that anymore. And I just immediately started crying because like the thought of having to tell any of my family or friends or associates or my husband that I no longer believed in the Mormon Church was really scary, because there can be a lot of shunning or various things like that come along with no longer believing. And so I didn't tell anyone for a long time, like absolutely no one, and I just kind of held it inside. But eventually told my husband. We disagreed, and so for a few years we were in disagreement about that, which was quite hard. But eventually I decided I was no longer going to go to church or participate, and I went to my congregational leader and told him I would no longer be attending church. And there was a lot of, it was a really hard conversation to have. There was a lot of him kind of saying like, okay, you're going to regret this someday. Like, someday when you come crawling back, like, don't tell me I didn't tell you, kind of thing. But I felt very confident about it, for me personally, that was the right decision. I basically, like, the thing that I had an issue with was gay marriage, because the official church stance is that gay people cannot get married. And I have two very good friends from BYU who were gay, and just watching the pain that they experienced at the hands of their families was something that did not make sense in my mind. If this church is all about loving and serving, that didn't check out. And so, I felt very strongly that, I just had to follow my gut. And, a lot of things kind of fell out of place after that. And so, it really made sense. But I I finally told my family a little over a year ago that I left. My brother was getting married in the Mormon temple, and so I wasn't going to be able to attend that ceremony. So I, hadn't told them for a couple of years, but kind of had to, and that was really hard. And it was the scariest thing that I've ever had to do. And I didn't tell them for so long because I had built it up in my mind so much that it was going to be this terrible falling out. And once I told them, it wasn't that big of a deal anymore. I just only had a sense of relief. And ever since then, I've kind of had this like almost invincible feeling of like, oh, well, if I can do that thing that was the scariest thing I ever could have imagined, like, what else am I holding myself back from? Awesome. And it's so much better to live authentically and to be able to just speak about how I actually feel. And so it's been a very like empowering experience, painful but good.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, and I'm so glad that that's the case, because through pain comes growth, and you've grown into yourself. Sometimes you have to grow away from people to grow into yourself, and that's so amazing that you've had the courage to do that. I mean, anyone can think that that's really hard. Again, it's not just for religious communities. Any circle that you belong to, it's so hard to tell them that you disagree with them and you have to move on from them in some way. And that's such a demonstration of power. I applaud you for that.
Thank you. Honestly, I've drawn a lot of strength from the stories of other people who've gone through similar situations. And also, there's a lot of just art in the world where people are speaking about very similar experiences. And one movie in particular that really helped me was The Big Sick, which is the story of Kumail Nanjiani and his now wife. But basically there's a part in the movie where Kumail has to tell his parents that he is no longer a part of the religion that he was raised in. And it was devastating for his parents. It was absolutely devastating, and he knew it was going to be. But then he was okay, and like, it's like, okay, well, now we're on the same page. I can be myself. You guys know where I stand. And so like, I went and watched that in the theater with some of my friends, and had a bit of a cry in the theater. It was good.
That's great. That's great. And that's why it's so important to share these stories. As Casey, I think, mentioned a few episodes ago, with diversity, there are parts of diversity that are easy to demonstrate because they're visible, and then things like religious affiliation or any other types of belonging, again, that can attribute to us feeling like we actually don't belong, we're misplaced there. It's so hard to address them. So it's so important to hear voices like yours and to show that it's possible, that it can help you, again, it can help you grow into a better, more content human being, and that not everything has to fall apart. Your family responded ultimately positively in a way. Everything is okay if everyone's on their own turf and feels comfortable. So that's important.
Definitely.
Wonderful. So I was gonna, I guess, take not quite an elbow turn, but go into another little topic that we were gonna address today, which is the imposter syndrome. You guys might have heard of this. I think it's sort of a frequent topic of conversation in the arts, but it can happen in any field of life. So just for our listeners who don't know, the imposter syndrome is a feeling that basically you're a fraud. You're undeserving of your current position in life, whether it be professional or personal, doesn't matter. The root core of the imposter syndrome is a hugely unhelpful picture of what other people are really like. And so we feel that we are imposters, not because we are uniquely flawed, but because we fail to imagine how deeply flawed everyone else must necessarily be beneath their, glossy surface. So although the imposter syndrome is a popular research subject, there's still a great deal of uncertainty about the causes. Some studies point to the effect of family dynamics, others emphasize the impact of personality traits, such as neuroticism, but not proven, while the broader cultural effect of being a minority in the workplace is also considered important. So there are so many researches done, and this sort of sprouted in the 70s as an idea. But many famous people have sort of declared that they feel like imposters. So John Steinbeck wrote in his diary, he said, "I'm not a writer. I've been fooling myself and other people." Jodie Foster said, "I always feel like something of an imposter. I don't know what I'm doing." It was even Maya Angelou, who, after writing 11 books and winning so many awards, she said that she couldn't escape the nagging doubt that she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. And I think it's so interesting, and I've been talking to a lot of my friends about whether they've ever felt it professionally or personally. So I was going to go around our virtual room and ask, have you guys had any experience of imposter syndrome in your own life at any point? Carly?
Yeah, totally.
Totally.
It's funny. Of course, I've heard of imposter syndrome before. I've seen, headlines, whatever, people share things on social media, but I never really read about it until I was researching for this. And once I started reading about it, I just felt like most or probably all musicians could check off like every box of these things that go through our heads, about ourselves and our playing. And it's, I guess, so related to like we're constantly honing our craft. We're constantly improving. We always want to do better and better and achieve more. And that, the job market is so competitive, and, just like to feel like you're achieving something, like you have to work so hard. We work so hard in what we do. I just feel like, yeah, of course. And I think I'm trying to remember. I think it was in a different article, not the video you sent, Ksenija, but there's something that said like how to cope with imposter syndrome was if you have doubts, it's make it an imposter moment rather than an imposter lifetime. It's normal to have doubts about your playing or about anything else in your life. But yeah, short answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah, and there are many ways that people can tackle this. We're going to discuss some of those. Ben, you were going to add something.
Well, yeah, I had a few things to add. You were talking about all these, John Steinbeck and all these people. One of my favorite examples of this is Kurt Vonnegut, who's one of my absolute favorite authors. And he has this quote, and I'll butcher it, but Kurt Vonnegut he always wanted to be an artist, like a painter, sketcher, something like that. And he always said that he felt like he was a failed artist that made his living through writing. And it's like
cool.
Not bad.
Like,
B-level production.
Like, first of all, who can even make a living writing? Like, that's such a unique, skill you have to be so good at. And then second of all, like, oh God, it just kills me. But yeah, one thing that as soon as I started reading about this and thinking about it, I just had a few thoughts to share. One is, I remember actually very specifically on my DMA auditions, I had this thought to myself that no, I'm not going to make it. Like I'm not good enough. And so then I had this thought like, okay, well, all I need to do is just like kind of go in and fake it, like just play through the piece and like make it sound like the score says it's supposed to sound like. And like if I can do that, then they'll believe that I'm good enough, which is exactly what you're describing right now. It was like, it sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but I was seriously like, yeah, if I can just kind of get through the entire score of Con Variations and make it sound like the score to Con Variations, then I guess maybe I can trick them. That means that you played the piece, And it also made me think of one thing that fascinates me is I watch professional after professional, and I don't know why the person that sticks in my head with this is Shi Wu. When she walks out on stage, she looks so incredibly confident. Like I don't detect any nerves of her getting behind an instrument. And like, not to toot my own horn, but when I watch a recording of myself playing a concerto, I don't look nervous just walking across the stage to my instrument. But yet I know that inside I'm absolutely like freaking out. And it's like the whole thing with this is that we can't picture that a superhero like Shi Wu would possibly feel that sensation of nervousness walking across the stage. There's no way that Shi Wu feels that. But she does. Like I know for a fact that she has to, and I do too. So it's sort of makes our superheroes humans. And then I had one other thing to share with this, and that is that when I think of like my role models that I think of as just absolute confident people, it's no secret, I've said this many times before, Steve Jobs is like one of my heroes, amazing human being. And when you watch Steve Jobs do these presentations of the latest, product that he was introducing, he never seemed nervous. And I had to remember that, at one point, Steve Jobs wasn't Steve Jobs that we know. He at one point, he probably had thoughts that maybe his career would fail. And I actually found his first ever TV interview. I think the clip I saw was they were showing it after he passed away. But it was like the little bit where they were setting up before the interview and they're putting the earpiece on him and is it okay? After we do this, can I go to the bathroom or do I need to do that now? Do I need to stay here? And so there's this sort of awkwardness in the clip. And then the last thing he says in the clip is, and this is Steve Jobs, one of the most confident people in the world, "You need to tell me where the restroom is too, because I'm deathly ill actually and ready to throw up at any moment." And it's just, you look at the keynote address where he introduces something like the iPhone, and you never picture this guy "Oh God, I'm about to hurl."
That's a good one. What I failed to refer is that we're talking right now about the Impostor Syndrome video made by the School of Life, and Alain de Botton, the wonderful philosopher. And one thing that he mentions in that video is that he refers to the philosopher Montaigne. And he said how, Montaigne was famous for writing down kings and philosophers shit, and so do ladies. Meaning that no distinguished person, does so. That's what we think, but obviously they do. And obviously, again, this bodily function is just a metaphor for the fact that you only know about another person's life based on what you see, so what you perceive and what they tell you, which is a highly edited version of their life. Obviously, you don't know what's going on inside, and it's so impossible and probably not, recommended to imagine Queen Elizabeth on a toilet, but she did use it daily. So, being a distinguished person or a person of great power or great influence that amasses a lot of money or whatever, recognition does not mean that you don't have all these moving parts inside, and some of which might include some lack of confidence or self-doubt. I was going to ask Anna next. What's your experience with imposter syndrome? Have you experienced it ever, witnessed it?
I've definitely experienced it, and I feel like it's something I struggle with every day. And I think some of that for me personally comes from, having had a very clearly defined role taught to me and expected of me throughout my life. And now I'm kind of stepping into an unknown world where I don't necessarily see a lot of people in my life taking a similar path, so sometimes it feels like I have no business, trying to do something different. But, I feel like the older I get and the more of an adult I become, I still don't feel like an adult, but, I'm just kind of realizing that no one has the answers and we're all just winging it, just trying to figure it out one day at a time. And so that's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good thing. Casey, what about you?
I've never felt imposter syndrome for myself, but I felt it on behalf of other people, like Pius Chang's, dude, that guy's no good. That guy sucks, or Ben, you're wearing that Liquid Drum shirt, whoever that guy is. Yeah, it's just oh, that guy's no
sponsored podcast. Get my royalty check.
No, I felt that before, and as I was reading about it this week, it really reminded me. And you mentioned Ksenija, all these well-known, successful people who they're good at what they do. Who are some of those people you named? You named we had Kurt Vonnegut.
Angelo.
Yeah, Jodie Foster. Yeah. Like people who are good at what they do, and it seems like that's the key ingredient. So being, we hear about them because they're well known, but forever ago I reported on something called confidence versus competence, and only Ben will remember that here because he's been here since the beginning. But it seems very, very related to that to me. The more you know about something, the more you begin to realize how much you don't know about it. So you start to realize how, we've heard musicians say this before, I would trade everything I know about music for everything I don't know, because there's more you don't know than you know. There is more rep you don't know. then even though you've been doing it your whole life, so you can't help but feel like my knowledge of this is inadequate because I'm studying this craft that has hundreds of years of lifetimes, and we study it since where's the beginning of the grout history book when we study it? Not that that's when the first note was ever played.
Sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me of that quote that you are closer to being a millionaire than Bill Gates is.
Yeah. When you've only lived for so long and you're studying a topic that has been in existence for so long, you can't help but feel like there is so much I don't know. And so anyway, I think it's not surprising that the research, and I looked him up because I forgot his name, it was so long ago, but Tomas Carmaro Premusic is his name, Premusic with a Z. If you look up his research, there's a quick, easy lecture you can watch on YouTube that's a good hour or so, and yeah, it's about confidence versus competence, and they do show that people who are, the more confident you are, the less competent you actually are, which makes perfect sense. Like if you know more about something, well, you're going to realize how much you don't know about it. And that's why a lot of people in business get promoted because they display this confidence, and really it's all just a big show, and you end up being president of these United States, so on and so forth. But anyway.
Is that the same as the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yep, it sure is. Yep.
I actually I remember that episode where you guys talked about that because that was the first time I'd heard about it.
You've been with us since episode 80?
Here and there. I haven't heard everyone.
Finally, we have a fan on the show.
Seculos epitaph. There it is. Yeah. Okay. How many DMAs do we need to figure this out? So what's the date then?
You need one DMA or Wikipedia in the first, 2nd century AD, which is more than I thought.
I'm gonna keep this DMA-splain. Carly, DMA-splain this to me. That's a keeper.
Shush there. Well, the last thing that I just wanted to add on this topic, because I thought it was really interesting. When I talked to a lot of my friends at first about this, some of them would straight up say no, yes or no. But then when I did more research and realized that there are sort of 5 different types of imposter syndromes, a lot of them found themselves in it. So, for example, one was the perfectionist, setting extremely high expectations for themselves. And then even if they meet 99% of their goal, they still feel like failures. Okay, that's sort of what everyone thinks this is. But then there are natural genius, and those are people who have had a lot of things come to them extremely fluently and naturally. And those are the people who hesitate from taking up any challenges that might feel like they have to struggle through, sort of a denser viscosity of movement towards a goal. So I think that's a place where a lot of people find themselves in. Then there are experts. There are people who feel that they have to know every piece of information before they start a project or say anything about it. And if you're not sure if you belong in that category, just think about, having a TV interview and then someone calling you an expert in percussion, and then you might have, so many of your older colleagues in the audience, and you just think like, oh my God, how am I an expert when there's Mike Burritt there and Bob Van Cise, and how do I get to have this tag on me? Then there are soloists, people who feel like they have to accomplish everything on their own, and if they ask for help, they're failures. So again, a completely different thing. And then supermen or superwomen, people who push themselves to work harder than those around them to prove that they're not imposters. And this fantastically fuels into what I find to be a really big situation. I'm not going to say issue, but situation in the US, definitely, which is workaholism. So a lot of people who are workaholics probably get it from a drive of, but just from running away from this feeling. It's not a medical condition, and it doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. It does drive people forward, but the question is, why? Why don't we just move positively towards something because we are happy to learn about it, because we're curious, and not run negatively from this fear that we're going to be discovered, that we are frauds?
So, and just to be clear, this is when imposter syndrome is when you've achieved some level of goal or success and you feel like it's undeserving. So not to be confused with, hey, I'm 15 years old and I still can't play a buzz roll and I feel like I suck and I feel like I suck. No, that's okay. You should feel like you suck. That will help you get better. Like that's okay.
Yeah.
It's this sense of undeservingness or, oh, I'm not as good as the scholarship said I was, or the job said I was, or the first place prize said I was, or etc. So yeah, not to add any more helicopter parent band-aids, protection, not to add any more bubble wrap to the like way too widespread amount of bubble wrap I think is out there to protect people's feelings and all of that. Not to add to that, if you feel like you suck, you might, and
you do suck.
You might, like you might. It's not, this imposter syndrome isn't that it's, oh, I feel like I suck because I feel like I don't deserve it and I'm not good enough to have gotten this. And I'm an imposter of someone who is more deserving. So I feel like it's important to mention because that drive is important. Like it is a good thing to never feel like you're done. Yeah. And the question I was going to ask before I went off on that little rant was like, how do we deal with this and how do we feel okay about this? And I think I figured this out very late in my life, as we all probably should. And it's like, man, this student for life thing is wonderful. Yeah, you're never done. That's great. Wouldn't it be so boring if, okay, cool, I figured out everything there is to know about percussion and I've read every single thing and I'm 100% done. How boring would that be? And just like embrace that. That's great. It's great that we're never done. And that's why you hear those sayings like student for life. So on and so forth.
I think in me, sorry to steamroll, but it's really inspiring to see those people who I do admire for just the scale of their skill or art or personality, see them as those lifelong students, see them as someone who easily says, oh, I don't know that, tell me about that. Or seeing them with a book and saying, oh my God, I've never read about this. This is so interesting. Yeah. But the air of, arrogance and condescension is what makes us feel like, oh my God, I'm not there. But just seeing people be curious all the time and open about the fact that they, as you said, don't know a lot is great.
Ksenija, I had a question. The last type you described, like the sort of student for life, was there a name for that one?
Supermen, Superwomen.
Okay, yeah, that one reminded me of both Gary Burton and Jacob Collier, who both like talk about like I've never practiced a day in my life. I don't know what it's like, and it's not to say they've never worked on musical skills, but it's never been approached as like the burden of practice and of like going in and like woodshedding for hours. Like Gary Burton talks about, when he was a kid, they had a vibraphone set up in the house and he would walk by on the way to dinner, play for 5 minutes and go to dinner on the way back, play for 5 minutes. It was just something he just sort of accumulated. And Jacob Collier also talks about, he wasn't like consciously like sitting down, working on his scales on the piano, like to get them. He sort of just played. And I think I'm very envious of that as a personality type. And it's something I've like tried to incorporate into my own life, where practicing is maybe something more casual and just enriching rather than like skill based.
Right. Yeah.
Well, actually, that might be something we're all experiencing a little bit right now with no real performances on the horizon. Like, I don't know, I've been a little slower in things and enjoying playing more than when it's this deadline and this deadline. I wanted to go back a minute to what Casey was saying about like, well, if you're 15 and your buzz roll sucks, you suck. One important distinction I think to me is it's not like, no, you're not a bad musician if you can't play a buzz roll. You're like, you just haven't worked on that skill yet. So it's like, yeah, your 4-stroke roughs might be a mess, but it's not that you're a bad snare drummer or you're a bad musician or like, because I guess that's where sometimes we personify our bad flaws and start to define ourselves that way. So that's one thing I always think about, in self-talk and the way that I talk with my students too. And I also wanted to share one thing. There's an account that I follow on Facebook called The Aligned Musician, and it's a violist who is yoga instructor. Her name's Kimberly Hankins, and she posted something this week actually, and it said, "How many degrees or certifications do you need until you believe in yourself?" And it's like, wow, there's imposter syndrome right there. Like, we're all so qualified in our own way and in our own experiences. So just a nice reminder.
I think that's the thing, though. Like you know, because you said you got to practice your buzz rolls, or you're not a bad person, you just haven't practiced yet. But like, you'll know you're done when you don't feel that, like, oh, I suck. Like, when you don't feel that anymore in that one little instance and degree, because it's all just a series of little steps, you know, little small pebble to rock to boulder steps of like, oh, I can't do this buzz roll yet, and oh, I've been practicing it for a whopping 5 minutes. Like, well, yeah, you don't. It's okay. Like, you don't need to feel good yet. Like, it's okay. Like, the goal is to ultimately feel good, not feel good right now. You know, and I think sometimes there's so much bubble wrap around feeling good and good about yourself right now. Like, well, dude, that's it. It's like, yeah, you feel good after you've mowed the lawn, not while you're mowing the lawn. It's like, it sucks while you're doing it. You're like, oh, I want to be done. It's okay, like, if you don't enjoy that, you know. I'm gonna edit this any way I can to make me sound right, Carly.
Hey, I didn't mean to call you out. I just think it's an important distinction. And you know,
Yes, I agree.
I think about gosh, well, here's an example. I remember being in lessons with Keith Aleo during my master's, and he would be just like so super direct, but also in the most positive way. And he'd be like that, like those 8 bars, that was such a big mess. Here's what you're going to do about it. You're going to do this exercise this many times at this tempo, and then you come in next week, and it's like there's something else that's a mess. There's something else that's a disaster. But he'd be like so happy and positive, like you fixed it. And I never felt like, oh, like I'm terrible. I just felt like, oh yeah, I got to work on that. Like, that's important.
Do you remember when Keith would demonstrate like the first drag on Kiji and say like, okay, you want the first drag on Kiji? Here you go. Here it is. Here it is. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Here it is. This is it. And then boom, he'd screw it up and be like, no, awful, terrible. That was awful. That was the worst ever. That was awful. I'm terrible. Or, you know, and then the next day he'd do a good one and say like, that was it. That's how it goes. That's it. I nailed it. That was just hilarious. I kind of just lived for those lessons to see those.
Yeah. Everybody loved their Keith lessons.
Damn it. Okay, fine. We're jealous. I'll just be jealous. So we have a couple of Facebook questions for Anna before we wrap. And I was going to ask you, Anna, they are from Matt Coleman, and they ask about your experience at BYU. Have you seen them?
Matt Coleman? Or...
Yeah, and have you seen the questions from him? Or I'll just read them out to you when you decide.
I haven't seen the questions.
If you want to answer. So the first one is, so let me look. A question from Matt Coleman says, Anna, tell us about your music education at BYU. For you personally, was it intense, fun, overtly religious, or something else? How did the mix of religious arts education impact you? We've talked a lot about this, but is there anything you'd like to add?
I mean, there was definitely a lot of overtly religious elements to it. You know, we would perform at devotionals, or we would perform hymns or things like that, along with like standard orchestral rep and things like that. I went on 2 different tours with BYU orchestras, and they're both throughout Europe. We're actually in Slovenia for one of them, which is close to where you're from, Ksenija.
Yeah,
is that right?
True. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, cool.
But, you know, the part of the intent behind those tours was kind of like a focus on spreading our gospel, you know. Mm-hmm. So, you know, a lot of our, there's definitely an emphasis on like gifts from God, like, oh, you were blessed with this gift of music. How are you going to use it to then, you know, further his work or something like that? And so there was definitely that element ingrained into my education there. I felt like it was a good education, you know, like I had a lot of opportunities. I got to be in a steel band and, you know, lots of really good ensembles and had great teachers. So it was still, you know, a great time in my life. I wish that my level of devotion to music had been a little different, but we'll make up for it.
Of course. And then the second part of the question is, what role do religious communities have in arts promotion? How can we get religious people to not just sing in their church choir, but also support art music? And he said, thanks, and awesome Shugaria performance at the BYU Phil on YouTube, which is true. If you guys haven't seen that, Anna is a superstar.
We need to mention that.
We should go and check that out.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. So he's asking about how we can get religious communities to support art
music. Yeah.
Art music. That's really interesting. For the past couple of years, I have been the marketing director for the Boise Philharmonic here. I recently left the position, but to focus on grad school. But the religious communities here in Boise definitely had a big part in helping us promote our shows. I think that there is kind of in a lot of religious communities an emphasis on music and appreciation of music, and so while art music is much different from what's, normally performed in those congregations, I do think that it can increase an appreciation for it outside of it. At least it seems that way here. And, it seems that way in Texas as well. But I know that when we were, oftentimes we'd collaborate or, perform in, cathedrals around Boise, and I think that was a really good way to get those communities involved, kind of bring the music to them in a way, or include their choirs or things like that. But I think that's definitely a really smart thing to be thinking about as we try to continue to keep art music alive.
Or resurrected from what it's experienced this year. But yeah, definitely. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for being our guest. We've had a wonderful time talking to you. And
thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Thanks for sharing everything. This is definitely one of the more vulnerable conversations that we've had, but I feel like your vulnerability demonstrates your immense strength. And I'm rooting for you so much. You are so smart, and I'm so glad that you've decided to embrace that and run with it. So I think that's awesome.
Thank you. That means a lot, and thanks for giving me this chance to talk about it. So I appreciate it.
We're so happy. Thank you so much. Thank you to my cool co-hosts. You guys are awesome, except for Casey, but it's.
It's cool. I just made this podcast, but whatever. It's fine.
He'll fire me and I'll lose all my income. Anyway, thank you to the listeners, and we'll see you on our next episode 239.
Thank you to Tommy again for this shirt. Please pay me.
Bye.